Cold air pushed south these past few days, bringing our first widespread freeze in the southeast. It's been pretty dry recently. Will that trend continue? Answers to this and more in the Southeast U.S. edition of the Water Resources Outlook.
Starting off looking at the 30-day departures from normal, and we see that the dry fall trend continued from late October through mid-November here, with many areas running several inches below normal through the 30-day departure period. And we can see this as well in the 90-day departures, again highlighting that after a very wet summer, the fall has been considerably dry. That orange to darker orange cover are deficits in the 4 to 8 range, and we can see a good coverage, especially across Alabama and into north and central Georgia, as well as into the Carolinas and eastern portions of the Florida Panhandle. A big contributor to the lack of rainfall this fall in the southeast was the lack of tropical systems, only Andrea and Barry making some impact on rainfall amounts, and those storms were back in early June. All the other storms well out into the Atlantic. So how did October look as far as state rankings? We see for most states, October was generally in the top 20% of driest, with ranks of 19 out of 119 years for Georgia and South Carolina, and 15th there for Florida, with September having been also fairly dry. This is the driest September and October for the southeast region since 1991, and 10th driest overall for the region. And this dry weather has started to have an effect on stream flows in the southeast. We are seeing some of our basins that were normal the past few months. Now they are falling into the below normal range for the 14-day stream flows. The Altamaha watershed, the St. John watershed are two that stand out, as well as the Schwann in Virginia. And with the dry weather and stream flows beginning to fall out a bit, now we are seeing more abnormally dry conditions develop across the southeast. And now for the first time, we're now seeing some moderate drought conditions there in north central Alabama. This is the first drought conditions we've seen in the region since June, and if we continue to see the dry trend, more are likely to pop up. What are the chances of that? Todd will give us a feel for that long-range weather and water resources into our winter recharge period.
Thanks, Jeff. We'll look at the long term here in just a minute, but now let's look at the short term with Christopher.
All right, we're going to begin on Friday with a shortwave trough moving from southwest to northeast across the area. This is going to bring precipitation to parts of Florida and coastal Georgia up into the Carolinas. It's not going to be until later into the weekend that we see a much larger trough move across the area. We're going to start to see rain move into Alabama on Sunday, especially late on Sunday, and then as we get into Monday, that rain is going to continue to move southeast across the area. By the time we get to Monday night, most of this precipitation is going to be along coastal areas and then down into Florida, with high pressure moving in behind it. This trough going to lift, and as the high pressure moves in, we're going to see just light coastal amounts for the remainder of this midterm period. So looking through that total 7-day period, then we can expect to see widespread either light or moderate amounts. For the sake of this graphic, I leaned more towards the low end moderate amounts. Looks like a lot of areas are going to see on average amounts near 75 hundredths. There are going to be thunderstorms as this trough and the associated front moves in, though, so we can't rule out some isolated heavy to extreme amounts. Looking further into the long term, we can expect to see near normal precipitation amounts across much of the southeast. The exception will be down in Florida, where we'll expect to see above normal precipitation amounts. Even though the front will be moving into this area late Monday and then continue to be in that area during the daytime on Tuesday, we'll probably still see some remnants of there into the long-term period, so above normal amounts down there.
Well, thank you for taking care of the short term, Chris. Now we'll look at the long term. And the first thing we'll look at is ENSO. Now, I haven't shown this for a while, but I know Jeff showed it in our last Water Resources Outlook. But this is our La Nina and El Nino look. And right now, through the winter, it looks like we're going to stay in neutral conditions, which we've been for a very long time. It looks like that will continue. And that the next chance for a big change might be as we get into the summer period. I'm looking to next summer, we might warm up and maybe get close to El Nino, but right now, the way it's looking, looks like our forecast is for neutral conditions through most of that time period. So that's the large scale, what we're looking at with El Nino and La Nina. What we're looking at now is more smaller scale. I know that as we look at the smaller scale here, we're looking at the Arctic Oscillation and the North Atlantic Oscillation. And these are things that impact our weather, especially during the winter. If you look on the lower left-hand corner, our positive warm phases, and those are the AO and the NAO when they are positive. We tend to get more zonal flow through the United States, and because of that, our temperatures tend to be a little more mild. Fronts move through very quickly. And when we get to the negative cold phases, we tend to have more fronts that move out of the north, out of the Arctic, and bring cold air down to the south. And so we watch for those to see how they're going to impact the southeast and how they're going to impact us for our rainfall. And so when we look at the observed and of the Arctic Oscillation right now, we can see that we've warmed up, and so we've actually had fronts come through very quickly, and even our cold snaps have been very quick. But now it looks like that's going to drop. We're going to go more into a neutral or negative phase in that particular one. Okay, so here's what that shows here, and you can see that in both that. Now that's the next 14 days. We look at the North Atlantic Oscillation, and we see a very similar pattern, where before we've been near neutral, we've been a little bit warm, but it looks like we're going to drop off fairly quickly. So how's that going to impact our forecast? Well, for November, we've been fairly dry, and we have stayed dry during this time period. Now this was put out on October 31st. We're actually going to get a new forecast next week, so our next Water Resources Outlook will look at the next one. But for the time being, you can see that the wetness has been a little bit further to our west. We've actually ended up being a little dry in the southeast, and so we're going to have kind of a progression as we go forward, where our late autumn is going to stay dry, and that as we get into those neutral NAO and AO, before we start to really get into the negative AO, that we might actually start to get maybe a little bit wet. We'll see. The November to January time frame shows us dry. This is November, December, and January time frame, and this is from the Climate Prediction Center, and shows us a little bit dry during that time frame. But as soon as we come out of that, and near the end of our recharge season, the February through April time frame, it looks like we'll have equal chances either way. It's kind of hard to say right now with all the differing factors that are going into our forecast. I can tell you that it's probably going to be a very topsy-turvy kind of winter, where we'll have periods of wet, periods of dry. It's not going to be a normal winter, and not a very easily predictable winter. So we'll have to watch it very closely, and please stay with us over the coming months so that we can continue to give you updates on what's going to happen. So the bottom line, looks like we'll have mostly dry days. Chris talked about it. And this is the time of year where we do see mostly dry days and remain below normal for our precipitation. However, we do see short interludes of rainfall, a chance for that rainfall. As for the long term, as you can tell from my description in the long term, there is a lot of uncertainty in the forecast. There's a lot of factors going into it, from global scale stuff to more smaller scale stuff. And in past ones, I've mentioned volcanoes and how that's affected our Arctic Oscillation, North Atlantic Oscillation. There's a lot of things going on. So there's still a lot of uncertainty, and that's why we want to keep you updated as we go forward. And hopefully we can get a little more certainty as we get into the winter time frame. Our next Water Resources Outlook will be recorded on December 5th, and we want to thank Rick Ullum, who is our technical person who will be retiring in the next couple of weeks. So all the good graphics and all the neat stuff you've seen from ours came from him, and hopefully we can continue with that process. But we thank him, and we wish him well as he moves forward. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of the Water Resources Outlook. Remember that you can find much of this information at our website at weather.gov/SERFC. Also, come and visit our Facebook page, where we will provide notifications of products we issue. Feel free to comment and pass that information along. And if you have any questions or comments, please contact me at the email address todd.hamel@noaa.gov.